Hello, everybody. I'm David Clutterbuck, and I'm the first host one of two hosts for this one of the series of webinars which CMI has been running for the last few months and will be running throughout 2018 and 2019. I'm joined on this particular webinar by my colleague Melissa Richardson in Australia, who is a particular specialist on mentoring programs for professional associations. So this is largely her show, but I'm going to be doing a short introduction, and now I'll let Melissa introduce herself to you.
Hi everyone, great to have you on this webinar. Welcome wherever you are in the world. I know we've got a lot of people from Australia, some from Europe, so welcome. In fact, if you'd like to use the question box throughout this, just to put in comments and ask questions, we're very happy to hear from you. It might be good for you to just type in where you are so we can see that you can hear us and that this is all, working okay. You can hear us. Let me know also if you can see my screen. So just type something in the question box. Yes, so I'm based in Australia. We've been working with professional associations for about 6 or 7 years now, and we have a lot as clients. So we've learned a lot about member-to-member mentoring over that little period, and we're also doing research in that space, so we want to share all of that with you today. Okay, so we've got one in Sydney, Victoria. Great. Hello, Jack, the American Professional Mariners in the USA. Fantastic. People all over the place. So, David, over to you. I'll let you get started.
Excellent. Right. Well, let's start with the first slide.
Yeah.
Got that one? There we go. Basically, the reason we've chosen this topic is because it's such a big, growing area of mentoring. What we're finding is that professional associations are both thriving but also struggling because they have to maintain a really strong relationship with their members and really offer strong membership services. And so mentoring is a significant part of that. And so the need for establishing standards and making sure that the people within a profession really do know what they're doing and that the clients can have confidence in them means that we need to make sure that professional knowledge is passed on. And while some of that can be done in schools and through normal education processes, mentoring is a very powerful way of planning, allowing experience to pass between generations of people within a profession. And so basically most mentoring within the profession is between people who are more experienced and people who are less experienced. But of course there are also lots between peers and also between people at the top of their profession who are making significant moves into different kinds of job roles, and we'll talk more about that as we go. I think it's quite clear as more and more people are working for themselves or working as contract workers, then they're looking for more input from their professional associations in managing their own professional development. And we look at the transitions that people make, and they can be just through starting in the profession, or through some of the most major questions, like if you're a lawyer, for example, how do you get to become a partner? Or an accountant, how do you actually understand that black box between being an ordinary employee and being a partner in the organization? So that helping somebody to make that transition is a really important part of maintaining the professional standards. Similarly, we're finding that there are lots of examples of people moving into becoming a director of an organization, particularly if they're a professional operating in the commercial sector. And that, again, becoming a director is a big shift in terms of the way that you think. And so having somebody who's made that shift already, that transition, working with somebody who's working towards it, is an important part of of supporting professionals wherever they are. And on the next slide, we've got some of the organizations which we've between us worked with, and I'll just talk about some of the ones that I'm particularly fond of. The Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales had a variety of programs basically looking at helping people at senior levels to become directors or finance directors. Similarly, within the Chartered Institute of Personal Development, the HR body in the UK, and indeed internationally, they also have a program for very senior people making director, but virtually everybody who joins as a young HR professional has the opportunity to be mentored by somebody more senior. And then to go completely to the other extreme, the Royal College of General Practitioners has had a scheme for some years for people working in the area of drug addiction. And here, somebody who's worked with drug addicts for many years is able to work alongside and to support somebody who's just starting out in this field, which can be terribly traumatic and challenging for them. And they found that this is an important part of keeping people in that part of the profession, but also attracting them to that part of the profession. Now, Melissa's going to talk to you about some of these other examples from the slide.
Yeah, and I think David's example that he just recounted is very similar to the situation that AVA found itself in, where with young, so that's the Australian Veterinary Association, where young vets graduate and they often can't get a job in the city, so they have to go to what can be quite a remote town out in one of the regions in Australia, and it's a very vast country for people who don't live here. So often they're quite cut off from their networks and their usual support systems. So AVA is providing a mentoring program for graduates to support them in their first year transition into the profession. And finding that that is actually helping a great deal with some of the emotional issues that might come up, as you can imagine, when people are dislocated from their usual support networks. A couple of others that are notable here, both the Master Builders and the AURA program. AURA is the Australian Women in Resources Alliance, so that's an organisation that supports women in mining primarily and the associated industries. Both of those programs are diversity programs, so they are aimed at keeping or attracting and keeping women in the mining and the construction industries. So they have a very serious reason because it's a big problem with lack of gender diversity in those two industries. Similarly, the Law Society of New South Wales runs a program for women that's more for mid-career lawyers who are mentored by late career lawyers. But again, that's a lot about keeping those women in the profession, because many of them, when they get to the point of having families, find working as a lawyer competes with real work-life balance. And the AusAE one might be interesting to some of you because that's our Australasian Society of Association Executives. So I know many of you are association executives, and that's a program specifically for quite senior people who are thinking about moving into a CEO role, or who are already a CEO of a smaller association and looking to move into a role in a bigger one. And we've got a fantastic group of CEO mentors who work with those people. So I think just on that screen, you've got such a great array of different types of programs and different reasons for running them. And we certainly know that people are telling us that a lot of their members are actually asking for mentoring, and we'll have a bit more to say about that in a minute. So I might just let you know what we're going to cover for the time we have together. Looking at things around how do you actually engage members and get them interested in mentoring, either as a mentor or a mentee. How do you balance the need for having, you know, a good program with high quality relationships, which naturally brings with it some degree of cost, with the issue that associations have, which is we never have enough money. So some ideas on that. We'll talk very briefly about using virtual media for training and support of mentoring programs. We'll talk about the role of a program manager and how much time that actually takes up, and the program sponsors, and just a couple of points on continuous improvement. So if there's anything else you'd like us to cover, please put that in the question box, because we're really happy to, you know, respond to your needs today. We ran this webinar yesterday and the conversation went in slightly different directions sometimes than we expected. So we're very happy to do that. We might just, though, run a quick poll.
Australian time, that is.
Yesterday, yes, it was for you this morning, wasn't it, David? So in case you don't know, David, where did you say you were? You're in a different place to where you were when we did the other one today.
Yeah, I'm in Dundee now, yes.
Yeah, he's in Dundee. When you were in London yesterday or somewhere in the UK. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so quick poll. Because we've been doing our own research to try and find out of the associations out there, how many of them actually have a mentoring program currently. So if you could just very quickly give us a yes or a no. Okay, about half of you have voted. Keep going. If you can't work out how to use the poll, just type something in the question box. That's also fine. Okay, looking like roughly in line with our own research, which is not surprising. Okay, so here's the results. Roughly 2/3 yes, and well, a bit under, so 57 and 43. So when you look at our research on that, we've been doing surveys. We ran one in 2016, and this is some of the data from that survey. We are actually running it again in 2017, so if there's any of you who haven't participated, we'd love you to please go onto the Art of Mentoring website and complete our survey. It's really helpful for all of us to get that data. So we were looking at roughly 2/3 that we surveyed said they were already doing mentoring in some form or another. For the associations that didn't already have a mentoring program, they're actually saying they want one. It's on their to-do list, but they don't know where to start, which is a very common problem. Another issue is that of the associations doing their mentoring programs, 1/3 of them were not satisfied with the results they were getting. So I think we were discussing this yesterday, David. It's very easy to start some form of mentoring program, but it's not so easy to actually start a good mentoring program and to run a program effectively. So for those of you that already have one, I guess you're on this webinar because you're trying to find out maybe how to do it better. The other information we got was the most popular or the most often used type of mentoring program was one for younger members. So we see that a lot, looking to support the sort of under 35s group. Graduate and student programs also, peer programs, diversity programs, those were the most often run. So that's probably, there's nothing surprising in that. We did ask them a lot of questions about how they were actually running their programs and what practices and protocols they used. And then we ran a little assessment based on the ISMCP criteria, which are the international standards, and we kind of gave a scorecard for the group that participated. And we were surprised actually at how well some of the associations did. They had terrific processes for selecting and matching. They were very clear and were able to communicate clearly the purpose of their program. Some of the areas though they fell down on were things like stakeholder training and briefing. Not enough of them were actually preparing their mentors and mentees with education for their mentoring relationships. And not enough of them had a published code of ethics, and they weren't necessarily looking after or tracking the mentoring pairs. So some of them were just launching a program and saying, off you go, and just kind of, that was it, hoping for the best. And we know that often that just simply doesn't work. I don't know if you wanted to say more about that, David.
No, I mean, that's clear that we that if you don't support people, you significantly reduce the impact for the relationships in general and of the program as a whole.
Yeah, and so we compared that to a corporate group and we found very similar results. So it's not that associations are doing better or worse. This is typical across the globe for how people are running their programs. So we'd certainly like to see more people using good practice when they set up and run a mentoring program. These were some of the things that, I'm just going to put all of these up so you can see them, that people were saying were, the feedback they were getting for the programs they were running. So it was helping students make career choices. I'm not going to read everything on the screen, you can read that. So lots of different reasons depending on the type of program they were running. So reporting lots of benefits. And in this year's survey, we're actually asking the program managers to give us some feedback on what they actually think the return on investment is, because to our knowledge, there's no research like that being conducted in the world. So this is important because we do believe that individuals will increasingly look to their associations and not their employers for their professional development, and importantly, their mentoring. It's important that associations, really think about mentoring and doing it well. Some of the reasons that we diagnosed as to why they weren't getting the kind of results they were hoping for were firstly their program design, because people think it's actually quite easy to set up a mentoring program. If you don't have some mentoring expertise, it's very easy actually to make some pretty basic mistakes. Not rocket science, but there are some traps for people who haven't done it before.
Melissa, can I tell you? Can
yes.
I just tell you? You've lost the slides. We've still got the only thing we've got on the screen at the moment is the quick poll.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
how's that?
That's better. There we are.
Thank you. I've been rabbiting away, assuming you can read things on the screen. Thank you, David. Very handy to have a co-facilitator. Okay, now we can see the slides. Excellent. So, not enough emphasis on good practice program management. So, as I said before, sometimes launching a program and leaving the pairs very much to themselves. And a lack of funds for high-quality resources and a dedicated program manager. So we know that many of you have to use your volunteers to do administrative tasks, and that's fantastic, but mentoring program management can be quite administratively intensive and it's asking a lot. And so, really people need funding. So that one of the messages we'd like to give you today is there are corporate sponsors out there that are interested in sponsoring association mentoring programs. So be creative and go and ask people, for funding for your programs. Good. Some thoughts about member-to-member mentoring and why people do want to engage in it. Firstly, you probably have a lot of very experienced members who want to give back in some way. We get that feedback all the time. So it's a great way to engage members, whether they're young or old, to, as volunteers. So it's a great way for them to actually participate in your association. We know, again, from the research that we're doing, so every time we run a program, we have a question at the end that actually asks people to assess the impact that being in the mentoring program has had on their beliefs and thoughts about the association. And overwhelmingly, we get a positive feedback on that question. So we know that actually participating in a mentoring program enhances your brand reputation. And as we said before, it's actually meeting a growing need for access to mentors outside a member's own organisation. Some of the issues, though, that maybe are slightly different to running a program within a company are some of these. So the first one is, often people will come to us and say, well, our members are asking for a mentoring program, so that's why we're going to run one. And the first question we ask is, well, what are they actually looking for? Why do they think they want mentoring? Is mentoring the best solution? And if it is, what's the kind of reason that the association would get involved in that? So we really encourage people to think through carefully, is mentoring the right intervention? And if it is, how will it be focused? Because it's much easier once you have a really clear focus to have a compelling reason for people to want to join your program. And sometimes when we ask those questions, people say, oh, actually, no, it's not mentoring we need. We just need something where people can connect with other members and ask a quick question. And David, you and I have had conversations about this notion of what people are often calling flash mentoring. Do you want to say something about that?
Yes. Or fast knowledge transfer, as we tend normally to call it now.
Yeah. Do you want to say something about why that's not mentoring?
Yeah, well, basically, it's not mentoring because it doesn't have any of the relationship elements. It's basically, we describe it as Tinder for knowledge transfer. It's just very, very transactional, a quick. It's not that different from going on to Google or any other website to find some information. It's just that you're getting it directly from a human with a little bit of personalization. But it doesn't create a relationship. It doesn't create deeper learning, and therefore it's a very different kind of phenomenon than real mentoring.
And we would prefer that people don't use the term flash mentoring because it implies that it is a mentoring relationship when in fact it isn't. And so we'd prefer fast knowledge transfer or ask an expert. So if you want to set up an ask an expert scheme, that's great, but just remember that's actually not necessarily going to lead to real relationships of a mentoring type. Some other things to think about are privacy concerns. So particularly if you're using a platform where people are filling out their profiles, are you wanting to make those profiles visible to everybody that's in the program? Now, most of our clients say no. So, you know, we have the ability to switch that off and the mentor and the mentee only can see one another's profiles. So just be careful about, you know, how private the information really is if you're using a platform. Similarly, confidentiality concerns. So people are saying, well, you know, if I get matched up with someone from another company, you know, how am I going to deal with confidentiality? So, you know, in these cross-company association programs, you have to have very clear protocols and training around confidentiality and boundaries and how people should manage those. And those should be very clearly stated in the code of conduct for the program. Another issue that comes up is, should mentees pay? Now, I know many of you would like to make this a member service and make it free. And that's absolutely fine. If you've got sponsors and you've got funding and you can afford to do that, that's great. A word of warning though, in our experience, when people enter these programs and it's free, it's very easy for them to actually lack commitment to actually see it through to the end of a program. Whereas if they've paid a little bit of money, so they've got some skin in the game, we see a little bit more commitment. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money. It could just be an administration fee. So you know, maybe $100 or 100 euros, depending on where you are. Should mentors be paid? Now, in most of these programs, the mentors are volunteers. So they don't pay any money to participate, but equally they don't get paid. Some associations have begun talking to us about wanting to pay their mentors, which, you know, again, we think is absolutely fine. But we do believe that if that's the case, a mentee would expect a very high level and standard of mentoring expertise, in which case those mentors really do need to be trained as professional mentors and to be accredited by somebody who can actually assess their capability. David, did you want to say any more about that? Because I know you have some thoughts about that.
I think no. Let's move on because I think looking at the time that we've gone through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another point is, you know, just make sure that your association insurance covers you for professional indemnity for any advice that your mentors give. Usually those insurances do, but just do a double check of that. And the last point on that slide is really around, I think I mentioned before, the more compelling a purpose you have for your program, the easier it is to get people to sign up. Okay, so moving on. Sorry. Why have a structured program versus an informal one? Well, we know, and there's been some interesting research recently about introverts and how they are less likely to reach out to a mentor and ask them for help and advice. So sometimes people need a little bit of help to get into a mentoring relationship, and that's where structured programs actually really play a very important role. It's easier for somebody who's a bit shy to actually click a button and say, you know, apply now and be allocated a mentor than to have to maybe go out and find one for themselves. People actually do enjoy participating in a mentoring program as a cohort. Also, a defined program length gets people very focused, and so everybody also understands what time commitment there is. Having a program manager in a structured program helps make sure that the mentoring pairs mostly make it to the end. And usually in a structured program you would have events, so you'd have maybe a program launch event, something in the middle to find out how people are going, and then something at the end of your program to get feedback about the success. And people usually enjoy that because it's an opportunity for networking and shared learning, and also for exposure for your sponsor if you have one. And training also gives an opportunity for aligned expectations, which doesn't generally happen in informal mentoring. So all of this greatly increases the probability of you having relationship effectiveness. So we actually prefer structured programs, but if you really do want to do something in a self-matching format where people just go and they find their own mentor, please make sure you support it with some good resources, either an e-learning package, which is, you know, very video-based to train people well if they have to access it remotely. Books, there's books and ebooks and articles. We've actually, on our website artofmentoring.net, we have a marketplace section which has all the best mentoring and coaching books and resources we could find. So you can just click through and buy those directly from Amazon. So if you want a curated site, that's a good one to look at. So just make sure that you set it up right, you get the formula right, and you don't make some common mistakes. What about group mentoring? This is also something that people often are very interested in, because they say, well, we might not get enough mentors. Maybe we'll have one mentor working with, you know, 4 or 6 mentees. Maybe we'll have one working with 10 in a group. We actually think 10 is probably too many. So just some questions to ask yourselves really is, who's going to create and administer those groups? How are you going to set them up? What's the limit on the number of people? What resources are you going to need to support those groups? And I think the biggest question here is, do your mentors actually have enough group facilitation skills? And David, I think it is worth you saying something briefly about that, if you've got a sec.
I had a timeout there, Melissa.
Oh, okay. So we're just talking about group. If you're doing group mentoring, you know, people actually do need some group facilitation skills. I just wanted you to comment on that briefly.
Yeah, I think what we've been finding is that a lot of the skills that go along with that team coaches have can be really helpful as well. So that we're finding that team mentoring is increasingly a phrase that's being used to actually give people the skills to work with larger groups rather than just individuals. And there have been some very, very interesting examples of group mentoring from people like Allied Irish Banks, working with young professionals in the IT industry sector. So what they've done there is to basically start with, because they didn't have enough mentors to go round, they've used individual mentors with groups of up to 8 people. And then some of those people, if they want to, can come back and have individual sessions. But basically, most of the mentoring sessions are run as a group. What this has, one of the impacts of that was the actual retention of people in the profession went up significantly, so that it actually trebled the retention of these young people in the profession, or in that particular experiment. I think that's an outlier result. I haven't seen anything quite as good as that since then. But I think there's something really helpful here in terms of having groups of people, group mentoring, where you haven't got enough mentors to go round for everybody. And particularly if you get mentees to come together and create their own groups. And we've also now seen quite a lot of examples where mentors come together and have groups of self-support, of mutual support as well.
But those mentors really need to know how to manage groups, so they need some specific training on that, don't they?
Absolutely. It's a totally different environment.
So if this is your first time in mentoring and this is the first time your mentors have mentored, then it probably isn't a good idea to jump straight into group mentoring. So where do you start? We'd suggest you start with a formal mentoring program and then maybe roll out other types of programs. So I want to move now to marketing. This is an area that is often really underestimated. So here's a kind of schema that we use that seems to work, and you need to run this over the life of the program and start early. So a lot of people think, well, I'll just, whack an announcement on my website and people can apply and we'll start the program in 2 weeks and off we go. Actually, you need probably a couple of months of really good targeted marketing to get people into your program. So the first step is to let people know that the program is coming. You can do that through your newsletter, on your website, maybe at your conference. Tell them it's going to open for applications and when. And then when you're ready to open your applications, you can send out another piece of information saying, please apply now. You've got maybe 4 to 6 weeks before applications close. Another message, apply now before it's too late. So you really need to hit people a few times, because sometimes people take a while to decide, is this for them? And another good thing to do is to run an information webinar sometime through that period so that people can ask questions about, what does it mean for me? Is this something I really want to be involved in? But then don't finish your marketing once your program's launched, because when you get people back together again at the halfway point, you'll get some feedback about how the program's progressing. That's good marketing material for you to do another round of communications out to your membership saying, isn't it great? Program's launched. This is some of the success we're already having and it's not even finished. And then do it again when the program finishes, when you get some final feedback. So keep that absolutely going. It's really important to keep the marketing going even after. The place to start is with a great web page. Here's a couple of examples. The one on the left is Chartered Accountants Australia New Zealand. The one on the right is the Australian Human Resources Institute. Great web pages, lots of clickable information. It's fantastic too if you can use videos. So here's a little shot from the AVA's webpage where they've got a very great video with a mentor talking about their experience of being in the program last time. Another great thing to do is to use case studies of mentoring pairs. So this is one from the Aura website. You can click on something on their website and it will download this little case study, and you can hear about it from the mentor and the mentee perspective. By far the best we've found is targeted emails from the CEO. So this is an example of an email that went out. There was general communications and then an email from the CEO of this association saying, please, last chance openings, we think it'd be great for you. There was a similar one sent to people that were targeted as potential mentors saying, we've got now 50 people registered as mentees. We really need more mentors. Please come in. Okay, I'm just going to pause because there's a few questions, so I'm just going to have a look at those and see what they're about.
There's just one major one here. I think, how important is it to have a program run over a set time frame?
Yeah, a year of steady requests. Yes. Look, there's different ways to handle that. You can run multiple programs a year. Obviously, that's more time intensive. So for example, the Aura program launches a cohort every 2 months. And then what we do for the progress review webinar and the program close webinar, we actually have people from a couple of cohorts participate. So we're not having to run webinars for every single cohort. The difficulty with if you're going to, not run it, if you're going to try and run it where people can apply any time, you've really got to have good digital resources. So, I mean, that's probably the thing to say about that. And it's much harder to keep track of people if they're not going through as a cohort. You got anything to add to that, David?
That's pretty much covers it, really. It really does depend upon how many people you've got, and the kind of program you've got, and whether or not you've got enough resources to be able to take on people and give them some individual training, if you're going to be doing them at an ad hoc time. So it really is very much a set of circumstances that push you either towards having a clear beginning and end for for different cohorts, or push you towards with smaller numbers an ad hoc approach. Both of them can work. But I think as Melissa is saying, it's more efficient to have a clear cohort with a clear beginning and an end of the formal relationship, although of course the relationships can go on informally after that. And apart from anything else, what we find is with the formal cohort, you can actually get over this problem of relationships drifting away. Because what happens with the formal cohort, everybody actually ends the formal relationship at the same time, so they can celebrate it. We do know that if the relationship just drifts away and they just meet less and less frequently, people tend to feel less positive about it later than if it's if they've had a celebration of what they've achieved.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I agree with everything you said, David. Most of the associations I know deal with this by having multiple intakes, either 2 or 3 intakes a year, or like Aura, where they actually have about 6 or 7 intakes a year, but that's unusual. They've got a dedicated program manager. So we'll talk about program management time. The more cohorts you have, obviously, the more time it takes to manage them. Okay, so let's look at the cost and the opportunity cost. So what are the costs of running a program? It's really hard to give a blanket number. It's a bit like asking how long is a piece of string, but these are the cost components that you need to be mindful of. One is the marketing. Now, for many of you, you'll just include it in your regular marketing and you'll send emails and it may not cost you anything, but you might actually want to do some dedicated marketing. So, for example, you might want to have some flyers that you hand out at your annual conference. If you've got more than, say, 20 or 25 pairs, you will find you'll need some technology to help you, because it's really difficult to manage that manually using spreadsheets and email, your email inbox. The cost of technology is really variable. There are some platforms that are cheaper that have very few features. There are some that are more expensive that have lots of features. If anyone's interested in that, let us know. We can give you some information about that. You do need some good resource materials. They don't have to be hugely expensive, but you could troll the internet. The quality of free stuff on the internet is generally pretty poor, so just make sure you check on quality before you use free materials. Another cost area is the program manager time, and that's obviously a cost. Now, you might have somebody who has half a role that you could fill up, so that's ideal if you already have a good administrator in your association that could run the program. Or you can actually outsource that, but again, that's a cost. So companies like Art of Mentoring, there are others around that will actually manage the program management for you, but obviously that's a cost. And then, of course, there's a cost in the participant time. So again, we've been asking people, what are they spending on their programs? It's anywhere from nothing all the way up to maybe 100,000 for some of the bigger organisations where they've got, you know, hundreds or thousands of people going through their programs. And then you've got to weigh that up against, you know, what's the opportunity cost. So we know that certainly in the corporate arena, the return on investment for mentoring can be something in the vicinity of about 500%. So there was a great study done by Sun Microsystems that just looked at retention alone. Never mind productivity improvement, never mind engagement improvement and all of the other benefits, but just based on retention of employees, the return on investment was in the hundreds of percent. And I think even though we don't have the data, it's very likely it's very similar for association membership, engagement and retention. So I think, you know, whilst there is a cost, there also is a fantastic payback, and believe me, there are people out there wanting to fund your program, so go find a sponsor.
I think it's worth saying, Melissa, at this point, that the data that we have on retention, the figures tend to suggest that the better organised and better planned the program, the higher the levels of retention that you get.
Okay, that's a good point. So you can't just put out any old mentoring program and hope for great retention, right?
Yeah, and in fact, it's debatable that the evidence is not there, but there's some anecdotal evidence that just putting in a mentoring program, an ad hoc mentoring program, may actually reduce retention because people get frustrated at not achieving what they want from the mentoring relationship and go and look for things for resources elsewhere, which take them away. Now that's in a corporate environment. How that would work within a profession, I'm not sure. Nonetheless,
I'm sure it's the same, David, because yeah, you know, we've worked with associations where they've had a go at mentoring, it hasn't been successful, and it's actually done brand reputational damage. So
yeah,
our view is do it right or don't do it at all.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I lost in on that last sentence, but hopefully that. But we're on the same page. Good.
Okay. How much time is involved in program management? I've tried to give you a bit of a graphic here. It'll depend on how big your program is, so how many pairs that you're running, but also whether you're running your program in a high touch or a low touch way. Low touch would be, you know, you just match people up, give them some resources and off they go. I guess the higher touch would be, you know, really putting a lot of time into talking to people and finding out how they're going. The more pairs you've got, obviously, the more time it takes. So, you know, most programs would run probably between 20 and 50 pairs at least to get started. The time required is very much weighted to the front end of the program, so a lot of time getting set up and getting people organised, and then it reduces. So even with high touch, it's probably still only a third to a half of a full-time job. It's when you get bigger programs that it really becomes a pretty much a full-time job.
To give you a contrast, we've had on a program we recently ran, we had people from two organisations. For one organisation, which was an international charity, they have 3.5 people full-time equivalent devoted to running their mentoring programs internationally, and another, a very large multinational with 350,000 people, they have one person with a third of her time.
Yeah.
And it's no surprise the one that's actually seeing the results is the one where they put the biggest effort.
Yeah. Well, there's no question that the higher touch, the program management, the better results you'll get. It's just finding the balance between that and cost. Okay, a couple of slides on virtual programs. We know people are interested in that, particularly in Australia, because we have people so spread out. Not everybody lives in the major cities. So you have no choice but to run your program virtually. By virtual mentoring, we're talking about any relationship that isn't using face-to-face, could be using a whole range of different communication technologies. It can work. There's lots of data suggesting that there are lots of benefits of virtual mentoring. There's some of them on the slide there. The one about diminished effective barriers like age, gender and social status, we know that sometimes when you're meeting face-to-face, some of those things get in the way, whereas if you're talking with someone on the phone, it's not as obvious, it's not as in your face, literally, about their age and their gender. And, you know, some of these asynchronous media like email really does allow people time to think. So the mentee can send a question, the mentor can really think about it and consider an answer before firing an email back. I think the biggest benefit of virtual mentoring is it really does equalise access. So for people living outside metropolitan areas or in remote locations, it really does widen the pool of who can come in to a program. Some of the disadvantages, it can be very difficult to train interpersonal skills online. We tried doing mentor training by webinar for quite a few years and gave up and ended up creating an e-learning package which we think is much better. People do it in their own time and it uses lots of videos. It can be harder to build the relationship. So there is some data, some research that talks about that, and anecdotally we've had people say, it's a bit harder to build the rapport. You do have to work a little bit harder at it if you're not meeting your partner face-to-face. I think another disadvantage is you can't access the full range of techniques that mentors might normally use, particularly shadowing, where someone can actually go watch somebody do a presentation, for example, or you can't go off to a conference together and then talk about it afterwards. Those sorts of things are just generally not available. Something to be mindful of really are the generational differences, unfortunately, in comfort with technology. Comfortable than the younger people, but generally it tends to be the younger ones. It also differs by profession, so it depends on the type of profession or industry or job people have, whether they're used to using technology. Online access and connection's always a problem if people don't have good broadband access, for example, for things like Skype. And we do know too, there's some data that says, look, if you're in a virtual relationship, it's a little bit easier to dump your mentor or your mentee by text message than to tell them in a face-to-face meeting. So some tips if you are thinking of running a virtual program. We like to roll out the program in cohorts because we think, given you're not having face-to-face meetings as a group, you're missing that networking opportunity. Therefore, it's good to also use a cohort approach so people still feel connected. People generally need a bit more structure and they need access to very good materials, obviously. You do need to have some webinar event opportunities for each cohort. I think you also find that you need slightly higher touch program management, so stay in touch with those people a bit more. The training needs to address those usual topics that you would cover in a mentor and mentee training, but also how to make the most of virtual mentoring. And as I mentioned, we think access to video demonstrations is better than a slide-by-slide webinar training approach. Anything to add there, David, before I roll on to the last couple of slides?
No, let's press on. We've got just 10 minutes to go, so we'd like to give some time for questions, I think.
Yeah. So role of the program manager, it's really all about marketing the program, securing and managing financial sponsors, these tasks in administering the program. They would probably also facilitate the program events and be responsible for making sure that the program is continuously improved. You do actually need a multi-skilled program manager. It's not just an administration role. You need someone that has actually a little bit of influencing skill to get those sponsors in, for example, or also to convince people to get involved and to come along to the events. You will want some program sponsors within your association. These are the people that might help secure financial sponsors, but also help to promote the program and recruit mentors and mentees, and also provide some evaluation oversight, so make sure the quality of the program is actually good So these will be people from your local chapters or people who are generally interested in volunteering and helping. If you're not measuring, then you really can't continuously improve. So it's a good idea to do some measurements during and at the end of the program. That would normally be by survey with your mentors and mentees. We would like to see some associations, though, really measuring and correlating the results of mentoring with attraction, satisfaction, engagement, and retention data. We're not seeing anyone do that yet. We'd love to do a big piece of research on this, so if anyone's interested, let us know. It would be a big piece of work. So, shall we open it up to questions, David?
I think we should. There haven't been any other questions, I think, come in since then, so it's open to people putting in new ones. And if you can just type a question, then we can respond to that.
Could be a comment too. You know, what's working for you if you've got a program running. That's always interesting to share with people in the webinar. What's not working? What are you struggling with your program, if you have one? What are you worried about if you want to launch a program but you haven't yet? Comment from Jack.
We answered every question somebody might have.
Yeah, no, there's one from Jack in the US. We're struggling with industry partners who do not recognise the value of mentoring. Yeah. So maybe, Jack, look for some good resource materials, and we have quite a lot on our website, and David, I think you do too, that talk about the business case for mentoring.
Yeah,
and really try.
Come onto the websites, you can download all this stuff.
Yeah. You know, people respond best to data, so find some good business case data. You can email me, Jack, if you'd like, and I'll try and send you some information.
I think one of the things we've experimented with that seems to work quite well is to pull together a number of people, of partners who do really see the value of this and have got a good story to tell. And we found that they're often very willing to hold business breakfasts, for example, where they will present the case to other organisations. And the value of that is that it's more credible in some ways because it's people in the same shoes who are making all these comments rather than the association itself. So I think just making really good use of the people that do understand the benefits and the value is probably the smartest thing we can do.
Okay, thank you. Here's one from Meredith. Have you had a program in an industry that have clinical supervision which differed from mentoring, and how the difference is communicated to members? Great question. Do you want to try that one, David?
Well, one of the programs we ran some years ago was with the Australian Psychological Society, and training them their members to be mentors to other therapists, with what we've found in most cases is that they just naturally see the difference between clinical supervision, which is really about when people are ill, and mentoring, supervision mentoring, which is focused on people who are pretty much well and able. The big difference that we found, the big area that we found that the biggest problem is with psychiatrists, and there is a significant small minority of psychiatrists who cannot get out of their head the idea that any conversation they have with somebody should lead to a diagnosis of what's wrong with them. So they develop a hypothesis, and then the whole conversation is about proving or disproving that hypothesis. That's so inimical to the whole process of inquiry within coaching and mentoring that these guys just never quite get it. But again, there are lots who do.
Okay, next question. What technology do you recommend to manage the admin? Any names of packages? We have a technology, Nadine, so if you'd like to, we can talk to you about that, but equally we can give you names of probably 40 different mentoring program platform providers and you can compare. So if you'd like to email me, my details are on the screen.
I think one of the biggest questions around technology platforms is just, you know, what do they actually do? If they just match people and they just provide a sort of a LinkedIn group or facilities for having email conversations or online conversations, that's not really enough. It doesn't help to build a relationship. So one of the things that I would always look at is what is the quality of the support materials, the content that enables people to make better use of the mentoring relationship and opportunity.
Okay, another question from Brandon. What's been some of the best marketing tools to get in front of funders to raise money? Video interviews of mentees have helped, getting it out as often as possible in the media, both printed and TV. Hard data with number of contacts for mentoring and outreach. Yeah, and another option is to use a sponsorship broker. So these sponsorship brokers, and we're working with one at the moment to try and find sponsorship for some of our clients, they have relationships already with the corporates and they know where they want to spend their money. So it's actually a much easier sell because you have a target group that those people maybe want to get in front of. And they'll want to see hard data. So you can have lovely videos that tug at the heartstrings, but at the end of the day, they'll want to know how many people are we going to impact if we put money into this mentoring program. I hope that helps. Brandon, if you're in Australia, we can put you in contact with our sponsorship broker. I can't see where you are.
We've got, by Meredith, do you encourage your mentees to inform employers they're involved in a mentoring program? It doesn't.
Depends.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on the circumstances. If they feel that it would be helpful to get support from their employer, that's fine, but there's no necessity to do so. But of course, in many cases, the employers are the ones who encourage them to go for mentoring.
So the answer is it depends. Do you suggest, and just further asked, do you suggest programs have information about the program to provide to employers? Yeah, particularly if employers are suggesting to their people to go into the program. So yes, that's a good idea. Jack's asking, have you found that mentoring also helps with cultural changes such as women's issues in industry or academic institutions? Yeah, I think, Jack, you've got some issues in your industry about that. David, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, nothing has had such a great impact on helping women to break through the glass ceiling, to have confidence in themselves, to step into more senior roles than mentoring, if it's done well.
I think probably the question is around, David, things like bullying and harassment.
Oh, okay, right, yeah. So there are there is certainly a whole movement of mentoring, which we call ethical mentoring, which brings institutionalized or issues like this to the surface, and this is where we train mentors to understand the psychology of ethicality. So that will be one thing. But also we've got masses of programs now which are specifically aimed at returning mothers, for example, to help them make a better transition back into the workplace.
Have you seen any programs that specifically address issues around, you know, bullying and harassment for women? Just a quick question before we close.
Not specifically around for women. It tends to be actually something that's much wider. It has it for any minority group, and I think what we are certainly seeing in some of the outside of the mentoring context, but there's an enormous upsurge at the moment in terms of cases of people, powerful people, being brought to book or being accused of bullying and sexual harassment and so forth. I think what we're seeing is it's the power structure that does it, and it doesn't actually matter whether they're the same gender or a different gender. It's anybody they have power over that seems to be to suffer, and we're seeing that this is going to, I think, going to be an issue that's going to carry on for some time. What is the abuse of power by whoever it is.
So that's I think that's a watch this space one, Jack. I'm noticing we're out of time, David, so we should finish.
Absolutely.
So, thank you very much for joining us. Yeah. And you know, enjoy the rest of your day and or evening, and we look forward to seeing you maybe at the next webinar, which is in January. What's the topic of that one, David?
Mentoring executives and directors.
Yeah. So for people on our database, you'll get an invitation to that shortly. Thank you for being with us. Over and out from us.
Cheers then, everybody.